last year, we were at the Glenn Sanders and over at the Marriott, shaking hands, giving hugs, eating cookies and brownies, and wow, as Dolly Parton says on the if you want the rain, you got rainbow, you got to put up with the rain. What a great ambassador she is. Anyway, all of our lives came to a grinding halt in March of this year, and we all had to hunker down. You all were not going anyplace. We weren't going to the movies. We weren't going to dinner. We weren't seeing our families. Couldn't even have weddings and funerals. And our office, for the same reason, in March, we had to almost literally physically shut our offices completely. And all of a sudden, the next day, we were all working from home. And it was awkward at first. It was different. But I think we tried to make the effort for all of our clients to be available because we know you were going to need us, and need us importantly, during this shutdown. All of you were spending so much time at home. Many of you started dusting off your wills and powers of attorney and your healthcare proxies, and started looking at them. And we started getting a lot of calls from people who wanted to make changes. They wanted to change the order of their kids. And, you know, our office is really client friendly. We really want to be available to you, and we made every effort, and I hope we met your expectations in that regard. Because, my gosh, some of you know, we were signing documents in our parking lot. We were meeting people in their driveways, and it was really important to us. And so now, fortunately, in July, all 4 of our offices are now reopened. And while many of us are still working remotely, we're here, we're there, we hope we're still able to meet your needs, get your questions answered, and now we can have clients back in the office. So those of you who've been putting off coming in for a meeting because you want to sit down with one of us in person, now you can. You can call the office. All 4 of our offices are open. By the way, since we met last year, we've opened a new office in Clifton Park. And so those of you in southern Saratoga County who'd rather go there than Saratoga Springs or Albany, you've got a new option to meet with any one of us. So let me thank you all for the continued trust and confidence you have in our law firm. You folks are the lifeblood of the firm, and we really appreciate your heartfelt confidence in the firm. We really have a great team here. The lawyers, the paralegals, the secretaries, the scheduling coordinators, the care coordinators. We have a great team of people here who really are enthusiastic. They look forward to getting up every day, coming to the office, and helping all of you with whatever happens to be on your mind that day. So this morning, our program is in 3 segments. The first segment is going to be handled by Jane Marie and Kim Hance, our care coordinator. And they're going to talk to you about something that is critically important, and that is the new community Medicaid rules for home care that are coming into play and going into effect in October. It's really important if you have someone who has a current need for home care, or you think is going to have a current need. There's a small window of opportunity they're going to talk to you about and explain to you the new rules that are going to go into effect for those of you who may be applying for home care after October 1st. Then Debbie Verney is going to talk to you about some important issues relating to retirement accounts like IRAs and 401k plans. She's going to talk about the Secure Act, which went into effect January 1st, and the new CARES Act, which was passed as part of the coronavirus legislation, because they affect substantial ways in which distributions have to be taken from your IRAs, and also allow you to undo some distributions this year for a short period of time if you choose to do that. Lastly, David's going to talk about how a Medicaid trust works, and he's going to make sure that you understand that you look at your trust regularly, you make sure it's funded properly, you re-review that from time to time, and then at the end of it, we're going to have a question period. I think you can write questions on the box there, and you can, if you don't want to do that, you can always call or email us. So in any event, once again, let me thank you on behalf of the entire firm for taking the time this morning to join us for our client appreciation event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harry. And yes, we do appreciate all of you adapting to this new technology and learning how to Zoom. And I think we're all going to be Zoom experts by the end of this pandemic. So I am going to talk about some big changes that have come to the community Medicaid. There haven't really been major changes to Medicaid in several years, but this is a big change that we want to talk about. So this change really came about before the pandemic. So before the pandemic, New York State was facing a budget deficit, as many of you know, especially because of Medicaid. So the legislature and the governor were looking at ways to cut money from the Medicaid budget. So Governor Cuomo appointed the Medicaid Redesign Team 2. And that's 2 because he did this several years ago and they came up with some cuts, basically implementing managed long-term care. That was a while ago. So now they reconvened and they came up with more Medicaid savings. The proposals that they put forward to cut Medicaid, they passed in the budget. But that was around April 2nd, April 3rd, right at the beginning of the pandemic. And because of the pandemic, New York State accepted federal emergency funding. And one of the conditions of receiving that funding was that there could be no cuts to Medicaid. So even though these cuts were passed in the legislature, they are not implemented now. They are meant to be implemented on October 1st. Now there is a possibility on October 1st that we can extend the cuts for 90 days if we receive more Medicaid funding. So the biggest cut is the change to community Medicaid. So as you know, or you don't know, community Medicaid is the program that lets you receive care in your home. And now the change is that there is going to be a 30-month look-back period for community Medicaid. So currently, there's no look-back period for community Medicaid. And as you've heard us speak on the radio or at our seminars, you could put all your money into a trust now, this month, and then next month you could apply for community Medicaid and be eligible. I think David says in his seminars that he could get Bill Gates eligible for Medicaid. So there's no look-back period. However, this is what the new change is going to be. Starting on October 1st, 30 months. That's a 2.5-year look-back period. So what that means is when you apply for Medicaid, they are going to ask for 2.5 years worth of financial statements. And they're going to look at all of those statements and see if you made any transfers of money. And they're going to then add up all of the transfers that you made, and they're going to calculate a penalty period. And in fact, this is handled the same way that nursing home applications are handled right now. And many of us are familiar with the nursing home look-back period, which is currently 5 years. So this is going to be calculated the same way. It's just a 2.5-year look-back, but any transfers that you can't explain, you know, gifts to your children, gifts to your grandchildren, those are going to be counted and you'll be penalized for them. And so they're going to calculate a penalty period. And they do this by taking the, they have a divisor that's out by region, and it's roughly $11,000 for the Albany region. So for basically every $11,000 of gifts that you made, you will have 1 month of penalty. So let's say now this is, you know, after October 1st and I apply and I had set up, and I had created a trust right after October 1st, and then I need to apply for community Medicaid. They're going to look at how much money I put in the trust or my house. A lot of people put their house in the trust. So if you put your house in the trust, it's going to be quite a large penalty period. You know, if it's $11,000 a month, you could have a 20-month penalty period, for example. So you have to wait that amount of time now before you can get community Medicaid. So this is a big change to the way we plan, because the way we plan now is we can do things last minute, get you qualified for Medicaid immediately. And so now we have to think in advance. So how to avoid the penalty period is just like we said, like we always say, think ahead of time, create the trust now. Even if you don't need Medicaid right now, you need to create the trust now to start the penalty period, if you're thinking of using this in the future. So that's number one, is to try and plan in advance. However, number two is what we call crisis planning, and it's the same for nursing home, and it's going to be the same for community Medicaid. And this is for people who haven't planned in advance, or they did make a trust, but they didn't make it through the penalty period. There are definitely last minute solutions that we can do for you. So one solution that we use right now is a gift and a promissory note. And that's basically where we can transfer half of the money and save half of the money. And I won't go into big detail about all of these solutions, but just to let you know that there are solutions out there that we can use. And there may even be more that we come up with as the elder law attorneys adapt to this new law. Another one is transfers to a spouse. So you can transfer money to a spouse, and that's an exempt transfer. And your community spouse can have more money than you can if you're applying for Medicaid. So if you're applying for Medicaid, you can only have about $15,000, but your spouse can have up $74,000. So the good thing about this, the new Medicaid law, is that they didn't take that away. They were talking about taking away the spousal budgeting, which allows the spouse to keep more money. They were also talking about taking away spousal refusal, which is, let's say your spouse has more than the amount they're allowed to have, the $74,000. Your spouse can do a spousal refusal and say that they can't contribute to your care, even though they have the money to do so. And then that means you'll get Medicaid. So on the bright side, these two planning techniques are still available for you. So there is a lot of planning we can do with moving money between spouses. The last one is there are some exempt transfers. There's not a lot, but the caregiver child one comes up pretty frequently. So a caregiver child is if you had your child move into your house with you to take care of you, which is pretty common. And they've done that for at least 2 years. You can then transfer the house to the caregiver child without a penalty. You also have an ability, if you have a child, an adult child with a disability, that you can transfer money to them and not be penalized. So we are going to look at everything, that all the tools we have available to us to try and help you out and see if any of these exemptions apply. And now I'm going to turn it over to Kim Hans. Many of you know her. She's our geriatric care manager. And she's going to talk about there's some changes in the eligibility determinations. That's not so much of a financial nature, but I'm going to let Kim talk about what those changes are.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So in addition to what Jane Marie was speaking about, the financial eligibility, of course, we're going to have some changes in the actual eligibility determinations from a physical standpoint and what you need. And they're going to be a little more challenging now than they were in the beginning. So again, starting October 1st, there's going to be a change where physical maneuvering is needed for more than 2 of your activities of daily living. And a lot of times we'll talk about like, what are the actual activities of daily living? And those are things like the bathing, dressing, toileting, ambulating, transferring, eating, those types of hands-on tasks. And we talk about physical maneuvering, we're really referring to how much hands-on care somebody needs in order to complete that task. So when you're talking about somebody bathing, it's not just somebody to be there to be safe. It's somebody that's actually physically assisting the person in the shower, physically washing the person, whether it's one body part or multiples. It's the physical assistance of helping someone out of the shower. So those are the things that we really have to pay attention to. The language is a little tricky too, because it says physical maneuvering with more than 2 of activities of daily living. So really effectively, an individual must need assistance with 3 of the activities of daily living. So that's half. So that's a big step, because a lot of times we can make a case for somebody needing assistance with bathing and maybe transferring. Now this is stepping it up and requiring assistance with 3 of these activities of daily living. When we're talking about somebody who has dementia or Alzheimer's, we're now talking about somebody needing assistance with 2 of the activities of daily living. And that's much more restrictive than it was previously required under the home care auspices. The only change that really could be seen as positive now is the inclusion of language saying that somebody needs at least supervision. And when we're referring to somebody with Alzheimer's and dementia, because under the Medicaid home care plans, one of the programs that we use, which is called Consumer Direct, it doesn't currently allow for supervision as a task. So when we're looking at using Consumer Directed as one of the options for our folks wanting home care, we have to really look at the difference between somebody who has a lot of physical need versus someone who really just requires something that we consider oversight and supervision. So big changes there, and some of the things that we really have to pay attention to, because we're more concerned now, not only from a financial perspective, but really from the actual task need or need of the individual, medical need of the individual. So the other big thing that's going to change are how the assessments are done. Currently, there's an organization called Maximus that's contracted by the Department of Health, and they go in and do something that's called a UAS, a Universal Assessment Screen. And under that UAS, you get a score. And based on your score, kind of qualifies you for needing long-term care. And the way they do the grid is you need long-term care for more than 120 days, so more than 4 months. That's what really qualifies you medically for needing long-term care services. So the new law imposes a requirement for independent assessments of those high need individuals. So currently under the UAS, you're supposed to score a 5 or higher in order to qualify for long-term care. We haven't been given a number yet, but it's essentially equating to those who need at least 12 hours of care a day, that they are going to need to have an additional assessment done. And really the concern is that the state or the Department of Health can determine that the individual really cannot remain safely in the home and will need to be institutionalized. We've spent many years in the last decade really changing the system so that folks can be at home and have services provided at the home. And now we're really looking at maybe there's going to be a change in that any individual who scores high on this risk assessment is going to be required to be institutionalized in order for Medicaid to pay for the care. So those are some things that we're really concerned about and we're paying attention to and watching. The other big thing that's going to happen is currently your own personal physician can fill out the medical paperwork that's necessary to deem whether or not you have a disability so that we can use the community pooled trust for your spend down. Under the new rule, the new law, the services are going to have to be done by a physician who is contracted by the Department of Health. So currently that means, it's a physician that doesn't know you, who's not aware of your circumstances. And so there's going to have to be a lot of advocacy on those of us who are providing services and for families to understand that in order for somebody to get that qualification, we're really going to have to be very clear about what an individual's needs are and not just how they're presenting at that day that they're going to be having the assessment done. We still believe that Maximus is going to be allowed to do the initial long-term care assessment. So currently that is a good system. It's a good assessment in order to qualify somebody for needing long-term care. So we are hoping that that is going to stay in place. Still a lot of unknowns to doing that. So talking about the actual assessments in general, individuals in managed long-term care currently are have to have their needs reassessed annually instead of every 6 months. When we're talking about the independent assessments, we're talking about personal care or the consumer direct services must be prescribed by an independent physician under contract with the Department of Health, like we talked about before. Previously, these services were really done by your own physician and your own care team, if you will. The change really raises concerns about eligibility because again, that contract physician is really not going to know as much about you or the person that we're looking at. So we're very concerned that they're not going to be getting clear information about the individual. It's really, so the tool that they're talking about is supposed to identify how the individual can be met through other circumstances, not just in aid. So perhaps telehealth, maybe family, and there are other informal community supports that can step in. And while we have wonderful supports in our community, these supports are only meant to kind of bridge the gap for our folks that really require that one-on-one level of care. And again, talking about the Department of Health being allowed to make the decision as to whether somebody who qualifies for 12 hours of care or more, they're actually going to be able to make the decision whether or not that person would receive care at home or in an institution. So there are some real significant concerns that we have. We don't have complete language yet, so we're trying to vet through a lot of the 300-page document that was sent out to try to, make sense of it. So please stay tuned and let us guide you through this process, because it is going to be very challenging in the upcoming months.
All right, thank you, Kim. So before I go on, let's just kind of recap what Kim was talking about, because that all sounds kind of scary, doesn't it? Sounds like there's a lot of changes that are coming through that are going to kind of push back on the community Medicaid. And that is that may be true. They are looking at ways to save money in the program, but overall, community Medicaid is cheaper. Keeping people in the community and at home is cheaper than institutionalization. So I have to believe that as these rules are implemented, as they have regulations come out, that there's going to be workarounds, and that maybe they're not going to be as harsh as they seem. Some of them aren't meant to take effect until two years from now. So there's a lot of work to be done before these are implemented, and a lot of this got delayed because of COVID. So there hasn't been a lot of discussion and input from the community on how these are going to be implemented. So I'm still hopeful that it is going to be a strong program. Even we can work within these rules. It's not going to be hopefully as drastic as it sounds, because the government's still going to look at where is it cheaper to take care of you and home, and that's really the place where most of you want to be. If you are here in person, I'd say, how many people want to stay home? Raise your hand. And I would bet every one of you is raising your hand. All right, so just to review, I want everyone to remember that community Medicaid is the program that lets you stay in your home and receive care. And we are lucky in New York. I mean, I know New York is facing budget cuts and all that, but we do have a pretty robust home care program. If you look at other states, their home care programs are not as good as New York. So even with the cuts that are coming in New York, it's still a better program. In fact, many of you who go to Florida for the winter, right? If you are looking at getting home care in Florida, the program down there is not as generous, and many people come back to New York to access the home care program. So to go on with the review, if you want to apply for community Medicaid, you need to protect your assets by putting them in a trust. And the key thing to remember is do that in advance. So both for the new rule, just in general, that's good advice to do this while you're healthy, to get this done ahead of time. But in particular, because of the new rule, you need to get this done before October 1st, before that new look back period starts. So if you don't have a trust and you're thinking about doing it, please give us a call and we'll be happy to talk to you about it. Thanks.
Good morning, everybody. We're going to talk about the Secure Act and the CARES Act. Welcome to sunny Saratoga. It seems kind of odd this year that we don't have the track going on this year, but there are a lot of people in town. We're all staying safe. We're all social distancing. And we want to give you guys an update on the Secure Act and the CARES Act as they relate to your retirement accounts. So the Secure Act came into effect in January, okay, way before anyone thought that COVID was going to do what it did. And what they changed was you used to have to take your requirement of distribution starting at age 70 and a half. Now you don't have to take it till 72. And also you can continue to make contributions to your IRAs as long as you're working, right? Sounds like a good deal, right? So that's the good news. The bad news is that before the Secure Act, a beneficiary of an IRA other than a spouse could stretch the distributions over their life expectancy, right? So spread the tax out over their life. So what they've done now is an inherited IRA other than a spouse, because the spouse can just roll it into theirs, only has 10 years to stretch out the payments. So you've compressed that tax into 10 years. So basically the IRS is getting their money sooner, right? Makes sense. So there are exemptions to that. Basically, there's exceptions to the new distribution. So if you inherited the IRA before January 1st, meaning the person passed away and you were the beneficiary of the IRA before January 1st, 2020, then the old rules apply, right? So you could stretch it over your life expectancy. If the beneficiary is disabled or chronically ill, they can still stretch out. There's a lot of different things that you can do as far as using trusts to protect those assets for disabled individuals. This is kind of a weird one. Individuals that are not more than 10 years younger than the owner. I was looking at that like, that doesn't make any sense. So for instance, if let's just say, say my sister, say I passed away and I left the IRA to my sister and she's only 5 years younger than I am. Of course, I always look better than she did, but we don't tell her that. But anyway, so she's 5 years younger. So because she's not more than 10 years younger than me, she would still be able to stretch my IRA if I left it to her. And also for children that haven't reached the age of majority. So what that means is, let's just say parent dies and they leave their IRA to a minor child. Okay, they don't have to start taking the distributions as a minor. They don't have to start taking the 10-year distributions until the age of majority. So you're saying, well, that's 18, right? Well, not necessarily. If they go to college or, extend it out for school, they don't reach majority theoretically until they're out of school. So if you have one of those proverbial students that stays in school forever, taking, a master's in this and a PhD in that, they may not have to take those distributions till they're really old. You never know. You've got to look into these things to see if you can take advantage of them. So what else changed? So what are we going to do, right? So what are our best options? We always tell clients that they really need to make sure that they have their spouse or someone as a beneficiary of their IRA, and then they have a contingent beneficiary. Okay, so if you make your spouse the beneficiary of your IRA, they can roll it into their IRA. And I'm not just talking about IRAs, I guess I should have been more specific. These are any type of retirement accounts. So 403Bs, 401Ks, still the same thing for spouses. They can roll it into an IRA for themselves, and then they can convert it to a Roth if they wanted to. If they convert it to a Roth, they're going to have to pay all that deferred tax, but depending on what tax bracket they're in, might make sense. If they convert it to a Roth, then they don't have to take distributions from it, right? Because Roths, you don't have to take distributions from it. And then they could leave the Roth to the kids, but they're still going to have a 10-year stretch, but the tax has already been paid on it. So if the parent was in a lower tax bracket, converted it to a Roth, and then gave it to the kids when they passed away, they may have beat the tax game. So again, if you're not a spouse and you inherit an IRA, you have 10 years to take it if you don't meet the criteria from the prior slide. So 10 years, so are you going to spread it over the 10 years and spread the tax out? Are you going to wait and take it as a lump sum distribution at 10 years? This is something you really need to talk to your CPA about, talk to your financial planner about, to figure out exactly what the best thing to do is. If you leave the IRA in there and you're going to get the growth, right? But you may actually be in a higher tax bracket in 10 years than you are now. So you really need to do a lot of thinking about that to make sure that you take advantage of what's left of the tax laws. So other best options, you can roll it into a charitable remainder trust. A lot of people are doing this because they want to make sure that the kids' money is spread out for more than 10 years. A lot of people have children that they're afraid that they'll just cash it in if they inherit an IRA, which is, we've done a lot of IRA trusts, and that's something that we'd be happy to talk to you about so that we can make sure that that money is stretched out and to make sure that that money is protected from creditors, because unfortunately, sometimes our kids aren't as good with money as we are, and we want to make sure that that money is protected so that it can last for a while for them. So using a charitable remainder trust or using an IRA trust is something that you can do to protect the assets from creditors and to also protect it from the children going out and blowing it. So we'd be happy to talk to you about that. People that we've done IRA trusts for in the past, you should probably give us a call. We want to make sure that it still works for you and your beneficiaries, number one, and make sure that we maybe tweak the language a little bit based on the Secure Act. So next, we're going to go into the CARES Act. Okay, so when the CARES Act went into effect, what they did was they said, okay, you don't have to take your required minimum distribution this year. So a lot of people said, that's great. I have a lot of clients that don't want to take distributions from their IRAs because they want to keep the money in there, keep the money growing. They don't want the money. They don't want to pay taxes on it. So guess what? This year, you don't have to take it. But because the IRAs, you may be in a lower tax bracket because of everything that's going on. Again, something you want to talk to your CPA about to find out if it makes sense for you to take it this year or not take it this year. Another issue is your portfolio. If you have your IRA invested in a portfolio, then you may have taken a huge loss on your portfolio, so you may not want to take the RMD. So again, great discussion for your CPA and your financial planner. And as far as questions, we're going to be taking questions on the end, but if it's something fairly specific about your distributions and your ages, you're going to take your distributions and stuff, that might be a better question for a phone call so that we can get into specifics of your IRA and what you could do with it. So we all know what today is, right? Today is tax day. We got an extension from April 15th. Today is the day. Harry and I were talking about it on the radio on Saturday, and Harry says he's going to be standing by the mailbox for the very last minute that he can mail his check to the IRS. And he's not the only one. I was actually going to the post office this morning, and I had a lady that got to the door at the same time I did, and she goes, hey, can you take this in and mail it for me? It's my tax payment. I'm like, sure, I'll go in and throw it in the mailbox for you. So he's not the only one that's doing it. So today is tax day. So what does that mean? Well, if you took your RMDs, right, before today, then basically they said that you had 60 days to put it back in. But that's actually, it's different. If you took it in January, right, you don't fall under the new rules. But if you took your distribution anywhere between February and May, you can actually put it back. You have till August to put it back and not pay any penalties. And basically it's not counted as a distribution. But if you have taken your distribution, you can actually roll it into a Roth if you'd like to. So there's a little bit of different planning you can do. But again, if you took your RMD between February and May, you can put it back and there's no problems. If you took it in January, your 60 days is up and you missed the extension. Also, if you have an IRA beneficiary that was on the 5-year plan, which is one of the choices that you can take when you're a beneficiary of an IRA, where you stretch the distributions over 5 years. If you're in the middle of taking one of those 5-year distributions, this year doesn't count, right? So in other words, you're going to be taking it over 6 years instead of 5 years, right? So that works out well. You stretched it out just a little bit longer. So after that, we're going to talk about distributions from your IRAs based on COVID. There's been a lot of things that have happened. A lot of people have been suffering through COVID, and the government said, you know, we really need to help people out because there's a lot of people that lost their jobs. There's a lot of people that have lost daycare that have lost their jobs. A lot of people were self-employed. So what they did was they waived the 10% penalty that you pay if you take your distribution before you're 59 and a half. And what they did was they let you make a withdrawal up to $100,000, which is a big change based on the new rules, right? Before that, you could only take 50% of your plan and there were different restrictions. But now you can take a withdrawal up to $100,000 in 2020, right? If you fit certain criteria. And those are things that are under COVID, and they're actually on the next slide that they describe the financial consequences. So basically, you lost your job, you got laid off, right? You can't work because of childcare issues. Your business had to close. You're self-employed, right? You're self-employed, your income went down because you can't work anymore. And say you had a job offer and it was rescinded. So these are all things that would qualify for you to take a distribution from your IRA and not have to pay that 10% penalty. The other things that are great about taking this distribution from your IRA is that you're going to have 3 years to put it back, right? So what does that mean? It means that over the next 3 years, if you want to put that money back, right? If you took it for coronavirus related reasons, if you want to put it back, you can start putting the money back. You don't have to put it all back at one time. You can put it back in payments. They're not going to penalize you. And it doesn't count as your contribution to your current IRA, right? Oh, and I forgot to mention that. You have today's the last day to make contributions for your IRA that you can deduct from your income tax. So if you haven't filed your income tax yet and you need that deduction, today's the day. You can make a deposit into an IRA. So again, you can make a deposit into your IRA this year, right? And you could still pay back some of the money that you borrowed against your IRA. And basically, they're going to give you a 3-year window to do that. And I think that's about it as far as they go. And now we're going to talk to Dave about how a Medicaid trust works.
Thank you, Debbie. Thank you, everyone,
You're
for
welcome,
joining us. So, a couple things, guys. Number one, we do have a chat box. A couple of you guys have asked questions. They've been specifically to me in some cases about general things, but specifically to me. Feel free to write a question to everyone if you want. As Debbie mentioned, if we have really specific nitty-gritty questions about a fact pattern, always it's better to talk on the phone. We feel the same way on radio. Sometimes people get a little too specific on the radio and we say, you know what, why don't we meet? Why don't we talk about all the details? So I know a couple of you asked questions about RMDs. That's a great phone call to Debbie after the program. So we're going to talk about how Medicaid trust works. And this is the thing that I'm kind of most passionate about. It's weird. Some people are passionate about like painting or music. Apparently my passion is Medicaid trusts, which is weird, but I'll take it. And the reason why I'm so passionate about it is because, you know, I meet with so many people who did these trusts a long time ago, and they don't know why they did it. And they don't know what it does. And in some cases, they have so underutilized it. And we talk all the time about fact patterns where someone comes into the office and they say, you know, we can't take care of mom at home anymore. And we didn't even know you were taking care of mom at home to begin with. But more importantly, we find out there's a lot of money that should have made it to the trust that never did. Okay. And that becomes an issue. Money grows over time, or at least it's supposed to, and unprotected money in 1992 can be a whole lot of money in 2020. So we want to make sure that you do take advantage of this thing and that you also understand why you did it to begin with. In order to talk about Medicaid trust, we do have to first get on the same page about what a trust is. And it's a contract, it's an agreement between you as the creator of the trust and whoever you happen to name as a trustee. There are different kinds of trusts out there, and the two main kinds are one, a testamentary trust, and the other one, an inter vivos trust. Now, with testamentary trusts, they're trusts that are contained within the four corners of your last will and testament. Thus, it's called a testamentary trust. And that can be as simple as, I give everything to Harry Miller in trust until he turns the age of blank, right? I give it to my wife. If my wife predeceases, I give it to my kids, but not until 25, 30, 80, whatever I choose to make it. It could be far more complicated. It could deal with special needs, perhaps, and we want a beneficiary who has certain Medicaid benefits to nonetheless still get or Social Security disability to still get an inheritance, but not throw them off those benefits. So it could get pretty intense. And then there are living trusts or inter vivos trusts, and those take two main forms. And the goal of these trusts depends on whatever your plan happens to be. There are a lot of trusts out there, right? It's easy for me to say, there's two kinds of trusts. Obviously, it's a lot more complicated than that. But in general, privacy is a goal of our clients, and we want to make sure that we don't go through probate, if nothing else. And so we like those inter vivos trusts. We like them even more when they're helping with long-term care benefits. In general, for a trust, there's someone called a grantor. That's the person who created the trust. There's a trustee, which is a person who's the signatory for the trust, for lack of a better word. And then there are beneficiaries. Who gets things from the trust when the trust ends? Now, during the trust existence, there's also an income beneficiary, someone who enjoys the fruits of that trust during the existence of the trust. But when we talk about beneficiaries, we're really talking about the people at the end of the day who are going to be getting money from that trust. Within inter vivos, I think the two big kinds of trust would be a revocable or irrevocable trust. And those words are dangerous, revocable or irrevocable. We're going to talk about what exactly those mean. But in a revocable trust, you, the creator of the trust, by yourself, that's the key, you by yourself can decide to undo the trust. You could say, enough of this, I don't like it anymore, and you could undo it. That's what makes it truly revocable. But in that kind of trust, typically our client, who's the creator, will also be the trustee. That doesn't mean they don't have a backup trustee, a successor trustee, just in case they're incapacitated or they pass away, because the trust actually continues after the death of the client. That's the mechanism for how we get things to our beneficiaries. The trust does avoid probate, which is important for a number of reasons. Number one, although we like our clients, we love them in fact, we don't need any more of your money. We don't want to go through probate. It's not a very fun process, but it's a long process. And unfortunately, it's required if we don't plan ahead of time. New York State also likes your money. And so they charge you $1,250 as an example, just to get in the door to try to probate a will. And so in general, again, we like trusts, and revocable trusts serve a purpose, mainly to avoid probate and help in that way. Revocable trusts, though, do not protect assets. Okay, they're limited because the control you have, that ability to revoke by yourself, that's a little too straightforward, right? It's the control you have is a blatant form of control. And that's a problem when it comes to Medicaid qualification. Remember what Medicaid cares about, okay? When we apply for Medicaid, when Mike or Jessica or Karen apply for Medicaid services, for home care, for nursing home care, whatever, what we're showing to Medicaid, to the Department of Social Services, what assets does mom or dad have, where with just their signature, they could theoretically turn that thing into money. They could access that money. So you see bank accounts and CDs, savings bonds, cash value of life insurance. Your house, in the wrong fact pattern, your house is absolutely a resource, because you could theoretically sign your name on a deed to sell the house and turn it into money, and then use that money for your care. And so when we have a revocable trust where you by yourself can get rid of the whole thing, Medicaid says, well, if you can do it, well then do it, and take that money and pay for your nursing home and call us when you're out of money. So revocable trust, great for avoiding probate, but that's kind of as far as it goes. Maybe some more in-depth, complicated family tree circumstances also. But it's not going to be a form of protecting our assets for our long-term care needs, and that's where our irrevocable Medicaid trusts come into play. Now, we're going to get into this a little bit, okay? I know many of you do have this trust. I know many of you don't, and you've thought about it and you decided against it once upon a time. I always feel that all roads eventually get to this form of trust, because if everything goes to plan and we keep getting older every day, and eventually, like it or not, we're going to have some needs associated with that age. A couple headlines about how the trust works, and then I'm going to dispel a couple of myths. So number one, you are not the trustee on this trust, okay? Revocable, you can be your own trustee. This Medicaid trust, no thank you. So neither you nor your spouse can be trustee. Your children can, family members, family friends, neighbors, whoever you want, okay? Despite the fact you're not the trustee, you're not the signatory for the trust, because that's what a trustee is, you still always have the right to change who that person is. You can amend your trust, even though it's irrevocable, right? We're going to dispel what that word means. You can amend your trust to change your trustee, excuse me. In addition, you could amend your trust to change who gets what one day. So your trust at some point, and for those of you who have the trust, page 3, article 2, says, upon my death, pay some final expenses, and then everything goes as follows. And maybe it's family, maybe it's charities, maybe it's a mix of the two. You can change that. That's not locked in. You can always change your beneficiaries whenever you feel like it. It's a very simple amendment. It's not a big deal in our world, okay? You are the income beneficiary of your trust. So during your trust, when you put stocks in and bonds, you're still getting dividends, you're still getting interest. If you put rental property in your trust, you're still getting rent. Okay, it's all for your benefit, and you know what? It has to be, because you're creating this thing to protect assets in case something happens in the future. It may not happen in the future, and if it doesn't, why the heck would you give up control of your assets now? So we tailor this specific trust. It's not like other irrevocable trusts. It's a very specific trust. We tailor it specifically to Medicaid's rules. So you by yourself can't do it, fine. We have other people as trustees, but we control them because we could always change that trustee. You have exclusive use and enjoyment of your assets. So if we put real estate into your trust, it's still kind of your house because you pay all the bills. No one lives there except for you. If you decide to sell it, it gets sold. You decide to not sell it, it never gets sold, right? What comes with exclusive use and exclusive obligation to pay for things is things like the star exemptions and obviously being the recipient of dividends and rents and all that good stuff. You can reorganize the assets in the trust. This is another common myth that comes our way. Well, I want to do the trust, but if I put my house in the trust, well, then I can't sell it. Baloney. You could rearrange the assets in your trust however you feel. You could even pull things out of the trust if we want to, okay? It's not as straightforward as the revocable model, but absolutely you control this thing. You could pull money out. But when we think about a house, right, it's really a pile of money that looks like a house, okay? That is what you put in. You put the equity that your house represents. So if you decide to sell your house and downsize, the trust is actually the one who sells the house, and the proceeds from that sale go to the trust. Instead of a pile of money that, 300 grand that looks like a house, now you have 300 grand. We're still protecting money. And then you know what? You got to live somewhere, so you downsize, and now you have a $200,000 house in the trust, and an extra 100 grand because those were extra proceeds. Or maybe we have clients who decide they're going to rent, and they say, you know what? I'm going to pull some money out of that trust for my rent payments, and we protect everything else that's in the trust. So it's very flexible, and that normally doesn't happen when we use words like irrevocable, right? Day to day, you hear irrevocable, you don't think flexible, you don't think control. Heck, you don't think you can revoke it, but you can, as we'll see, because you can get principal from your trust. Now, again, it's not you going to the bank to do it. If it was, then we wouldn't be protecting anything from Medicaid, because remember, Medicaid looks at what you can get with just your signature. So how does the trust actually work? If you know me or if you met with me, I like analogies. Some are good, some are not so good. Some crack me up, some are not funny whatsoever. Your trust is a box, okay? And the rules about how things go into the box and out of the box, that actually determines what type of trust you have. I love this quiz that I get to give people. What word is not anywhere in your Medicaid trust? I'll give you a second. The word Medicaid is not in your Medicaid trust. And it's because it's not a Medicaid trust because we call it one. It's a Medicaid trust because of the rules. Because these rules, when you put them all together, accomplishes protecting assets when we are applying for Medicaid with DSS. Now, it's easy for me to talk about boxes. It makes a little more sense when I start to talk about restaurants and car washes. So your trust, your Medicaid trust, it's like owning a restaurant, okay? If I owned a restaurant and I called it Dave's, and it was some Italian eatery, bad time to have a restaurant, by the way. I'm the owner of the restaurant. Am I cooking the food? Am I serving the food? No, right? Probably not. Am I even dealing with the wait staff? Am I signing every time lettuce gets delivered? Again, probably not. I'm gonna hire someone called a general manager to help. And I'm gonna authorize that person to sign to accomplish certain tasks for my restaurant. If you asked anyone who owns that restaurant, they would say it's me. And your trust is no different. So when people think, oh my God, an irrevocable trust, I'm gonna lose control. Again, baloney, because you are still the owner. In that restaurant, I can fire the general manager and replace them with whoever I want. And with your irrevocable Medicaid trust, excuse me, you can do the same thing, okay? You still control everything, just like you would in that restaurant. Lastly, car washes. Why are we talking about car washes? Well, if you do go to a car wash, you'll realize there's a lot of different packages, and the packages go up in price and they also go up in benefits, right? The more you protect your car with some sort of sealer wax, the more expensive it is. And maybe that early package of the inside-outside vacuuming just doesn't cut it anymore. And the name of what we do is estate planning. And when we get a little more advanced, we get into the elder law realm, where we're not just getting the right things done, who gets what, when do they get it, which a will could accomplish, but we start getting into protecting the car, right? And so when we go to revocable, we're protecting things because we're avoiding probate. When we go to the Medicaid trust, we're still avoiding probate, right? We have all those benefits of those earlier packages like you do at the car wash. Now we have more protection. Yeah, it's a little more expensive. So as you go, you know, maybe the regular car wash fits, and as you go, maybe you need a more advanced and further advanced car wash. The idea is more protection comes with those higher level packages like the Medicaid trust. I hope that makes sense. Medicaid trusts are complicated. It's easy to just leave money in your name and go to the bank whenever you need money, but that doesn't protect anything. This trust, this Medicaid trust, is the only way we avoid probate, protect your assets if you need long-term care, and do those two things while you still control everything. The way you control everything is because you can amend your trust to change your beneficiaries. You can amend your trust to change your trustees. That's control, right? If I need more than one person involved because I want to avoid, you know, my Medicaid exposure, but I always control who that person is, that's control. All right, I don't care who you are. That is control, any way you look at it. Now, I convinced you to keep the trust you have, or maybe you're going to call us because you want to do a trust now. What a job I did. The whole point is to maximize the fact that you have a trust, okay? That means a lot of different things. Sometimes it's little ways to do it. Sometimes it's really big ways to do it. I like the little ways because there's little nooks here that we can really take advantage of, and I think that's what separates the way Herzog Law Firm thinks compared to some other places. So obviously we want you to put some things into the trust, and you're not going to put in those IRAs Debbie was talking about or those 401ks. Those will stay out, and maybe there's a different kind of outfit for that. And the reason why it stays out is, number one, you know, your individual retirement account, your IRA, needs to be in an individual's name for starters. That doesn't mean there couldn't be a special kind of conduit trust, as she mentioned. But also, Medicaid doesn't care as much about your IRAs and 401ks as you think they do, right? They look at it as a stream of income. They're focused on those required minimum distributions you're taking. So we want you to put things in. Well, it depends. Usually we start with things like houses, those illiquid assets, because at the very least, let's avoid probate, right? You may never need a nursing home, but I know we're all going to die one day. Sorry to say, well, it is cloudy. I shouldn't have said that. It's a little depressing. But the idea is that we can take care of certain guarantees in life. Avoid probate. That's probably going to pay for your trust, believe it or not. But we don't just put things in, like bank accounts, perhaps. Now, not your individual or your personal checking account, but CDs and things like that. But we also want to point things to the trust. And that gets us to things like our wills, our pour over wills. That gets to things like life insurance. So let me give myself as an example. I have, let's say, a term life insurance policy, and that policy is going to pay $500,000 if I die. Okay. Well, if that payout comes when I turn 80, and my wife is close in range to 80, if she gets $500,000 at that point, that's not necessarily a great thing because that money's unprotected. It's money that's now in her pocket, right? And what is she going to do? Maybe she'll throw that into our trust, but she'll have to wait at least 5 years. And because I'm, a long way from 80, it might be a 20-year look back period at that point. So death ends up being an opportunity to get things to the trust automatically. And if I use that life insurance example again, if I name my trust as my beneficiary on my life insurance, I'm pointing my life insurance to my trust. Upon my death, that money's like that. It's in my trust. Now, my wife, as the other grantor of the trust who survived me, she does have access to pulling that principal out. She's already the income beneficiary of that money. But if she needs a nursing home the next day after I've passed away, or several months later, or a year later, 3 years later, that money's protected already because she had nothing to do with getting it in there. I did, right? And if Medicaid has a problem with me, well, I'm already dead, okay? So the idea is, when it makes sense, point things to the trust. We do that with our wills. We do pour over wills whenever we do trust free. If you look at your will, you'll see you don't leave everything to your wife, you leave it all to your beautiful trust, right? Because we wanted that same concept of pointing things. So I want you to look at your assets, or better yet, come in and we talk about it. Here's a little thing that most people don't think about. I want to know if mom and dad are still alive. We have clients who are longtime clients and they have trusts, and now their kids are getting up there in age and they've done their own trust. I say, hey, you know what? You're going to inherit money from your mom. She can amend her trust to leave things to your trust instead of leaving it to you so it's in your hands and then you put it in your trust. Now we're waiting 5 years. Now we're waiting 2.5 years for community Medicaid. I want you to understand how flexible your trust is. It can do anything you want it to do. It truly can. I mean, that's not just like lip service. Anything you want to do. You want to blow up the trust, we can blow it up. All right. You want to rearrange all the assets and sell a bunch of investments, buy some new things, let us know. We'll tell your trustee how to do it. What don't you put in the trust? That's one of my favorite questions because we always focus on protecting assets. Well, I want you to create a budget for yourself. I know you got income every month, right? I know you have Social Security. I know that some of you are still working. I know that there's RMDs. I know there's pensions out there. Create a budget, right? How much money do you want to use on a yearly basis? How many vacations, when this all clears and we're allowed to go on planes again and we're allowed in Europe again? How many trips are you going to take, right? What does life cost for you? Whatever that costs for 6 months, for 8 months, just set that aside, put in your name, don't put it in the trust. Because I know you're getting income. I know that means you're probably never going to touch that money. And I know that it's all right if we lose some money. The goal isn't to be what we call trust poor. We don't want to do that. We don't want to protect every last dollar at the expense of living our lives. But I do want you to be aggressive. And that aggressiveness only comes with you understanding what the trust does, how it does it, really believing in it. And that's what we're here for. Jane Marie, Debbie, Harry, myself. This is what we do. And we can only help you if you come back in and talk. And those talks don't cost you any money. Sometimes it doesn't even, or oftentimes it doesn't even require changing your documents. It's just, that $100,000 you had in that brokerage account outside the trust is now worth $300,000. So it's time to do something, right? $100,000, maybe we could get away with it in the right back pattern. $300,000, no way. Don't be shy about amending your trust, okay? The number one goal for us as estate planning attorneys is to plan your estate. And that only works if you tell us what you want, where you want things to go. We need to know what's going on with your kids or your grandkids. If there's special needs somewhere in the family tree, we should know about it. We just add a couple paragraphs. It's not a big deal, okay? So that's my part, okay? I do want to add someone else to the mix here. His name's Dan Glasser. Dan, I was a solo practitioner specializing in real estate for about 15 years, and Dan is the best real estate attorney I've ever met. This is the truth. And Dan's going to join us for a second just to introduce himself to you, because as opposed to how we did things in the past, we now have a rather robust real estate department, and Dan leads the way there. He also handles title. Dan, I'm going to spotlight your video. I already unmuted you. How's it going, Dan?
Thank you, Dave. You know, much like Dave's passion is Medicaid trusts, my passion is real estate law, believe it or not. I really enjoy helping clients buy and sell real estate, whether it's residential or commercial, guiding them from the very beginning when the contract is signed all the way to the closing table. My tagline is always with you, and I mean it. So if you have questions, you know, as cliche as it sounds, well, people will say, I have a silly question. No, you don't. No question is silly. I want clients to ask and, you know, feel comfortable through the transaction. And like Dave mentioned, I have a lot of experience with title. So if you're selling your house and there's a title issue that pops up, a lot of people don't know they have a title issue until there's a title search done. I know how to fix these. So for example, if you refinance and you pay off a mortgage, that lender is required to file paperwork with the county clerk's office. And if someone in the clerk's office is having a bad day and they hit the wrong key, because everything is indexed by a number, and if they hit a 5 instead of a 4, your mortgage is going to show up as open of record even though it's paid. But you're not going to close unless we fix that. And I know how to do that. So that's it's important to use a real estate attorney when buying or selling real estate. I also have a tremendous amount of patience. My middle name is Patience. I mean parents. Daniel Patience Glasser. So, you know, there are some things in a transaction that don't always go your way. We're going to talk about it and we'll get you through it. So any questions or concerns, whether right now or, you know, tomorrow, next week, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Thanks, Dan. I do have a couple questions here, and I'll get Harry and Jane Marie and Debbie involved, and possibly even Kim if we have the questions. First one I'll take because it was a trust question. So Steve asked, what happens if you move out of New York, which is an excellent question. We do have a lot of clients who move. Just spoke with one yesterday who's moving to Florida permanently for tax purposes and other. So you have a New York trust. Article 7 of most of your trust says this is a New York trust governed by New York law. So I don't care where you go, we're stuck with New York. And I use stuck in the best way possible because as Jane Marie mentioned, when it comes to home care services, you know, New York's a lot of things, but when it comes to home care services, when it comes to trust rules, it's a pretty darn good place to be. And I view it as an asset that your trust remains a New York trust, because in New York, I know, despite what the rules of the trust are, I know we can do whatever we want with the help of the trustee and beneficiaries, and we always control who those people are. So that's our control mechanism. So if you do a trust here, regardless of where you move, I know you're going to be able to control that trust. And another related question was about out-of-state trustees. Absolutely not a problem. We do them all the time. The world is a lot smaller these days, and there's a lot more you can do. Now, I have a question, and I'm going to get Harry back in on this. Harry, I'm going to unmute you. And I'm going to pin your video. There we go. Harry, question for you. So you've been around the block. And I think in my crystal ball, I want to know about your crystal ball. Is there any way that these look-back periods ever will get reduced? I assume they're only going to go up over time. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. They've been, I mean, way back when, before all of you were, well, you were here, but you weren't lawyers. You know, originally back in the 60s, there was a 24-month look back. Whether or not you transferred assets, you know, it didn't matter how much you transferred. If you transferred $1 or 100,000, it was a 24-month penalty. Then, then it came up to the 36, to the three-year look back, which we had in the late 70s and 80s until whatever, DRA 06. And there was a 36-month look back. Now, in the last 14 years, we've had a 5-year, I mean, 3-year look back. Now we have a 5-year look back. I've heard clients talk about, they've read stuff about a 7-year look back. I don't know. There's nothing I know of on the New York or the federal screen that would do that. But I can say with some certainty that I seriously doubt that the look back period is ever going to be reduced. And it's a federal law. I mean, the 5-year look back isn't just a New York state law. It applies even if you have a New York trust and you go to a nursing home in Florida or Arizona, your trust still works in those states. All right, because these are federal laws, and the state couldn't unilaterally reduce it without a waiver from the federal government anyway. So it ain't gonna happen.
Thanks, Harry. I got another question for Jane Marie. Let me just work this out here. Hi, Jane Marie. How are you?
Hey.
So, Jane Marie, October 1st is a change, okay? And we know for sure if you apply before October 1st, that application won't involve 30 months of stuff. It's now July 15th. I'm listening, I got a little bit of a need, or a family member has a little bit of need. When am I supposed to call to start this process?
As soon as possible. But that's, let's see, a little bit over 2.5 months away. So if you call soon, we certainly have time to get a trust set up and a trust funded. But the sooner you start the process, the better, because you want to have your trust all funded before October 1st. And we can do the trust for you. We can get your house into the trust by doing a deed. But you're also going to want, if you want to put money in it, you're going to have to start that process. So certainly give us a call and we can try and help you get this done as quickly as possible.
Wonderful, thank you. A question that was just on the chat involved trust tax rates, okay? And what happens when we sell assets in the trust and maybe make a profit? So I'll take that one. Your trust is taxed at your level. And in fact, the trust isn't taxed, you are taxed. One of the elements of this trust is that for tax purposes, it's no different than if you never did the trust. Meaning if we put an asset in the trust and you sell it for a lot of money, you bought it for a little amount of money, and there's capital gain, well, you're paying that on your individual tax return. The trust itself does not pay taxes. You pay taxes, and you pay it at your individual, whatever applicable rate there is when you normally file your taxes. And that means that if you have your primary residence that's owned by the house, owned by the trust, and you sell it and you made a lot of money on it, well, if it is your primary residence and you sold it as an individual, right, you'd have an exclusion up to the first $250,000 of gain if you're an individual, $500,000 if you're a couple. That still continues for you, even though it's the trust that owns your property, okay? Because of that life use, because of that exclusive ability to retain your home and use it and enjoy it, okay? So one of the things we like to say about the trusts is that it doesn't make things any worse, right? We're protecting things, but we're not saying, all right, well, our tax situation is so much worse now because we did the trust. It's all the same, okay? Let's see if we have any other questions, and then we'll get you all on your way. Okay, this is a big question that Don has. Jane Marie, I'm going to move it back over to you if you don't mind.
Sure.
So the question is, if I don't need services for community Medicaid, does October 1st matter for me right now in terms of applying or anything like that?
Well, it still matters because you have to, if you apply after October 1st, you have to give the 2.5 years worth of bank records. And that's for every bank account that you had open in that past 2.5 years. It's a lot of paperwork to put that all together. So if you apply before October 1st, you're really avoiding that documentation. And sometimes it's hard to get that documentation from the banks. So even if you're not concerned about a transfer, just the having to provide all those documents is a lot more work, and you can avoid that by applying early.
Right, and I think, Jamie, the question is a little more towards, I'm healthy, I'm doing fine. I'm not anticipating a need 6 months from now, so I'm not going to be applying for Medicaid if I don't need it yet, which I think is the case.
Right.
There, though, I think everyone needs to focus on now, that get out of jail free card that we had. We could always do community Medicaid immediately. It's not available anymore. There will be a look back, so it makes that trust that much more important.
That's right. Yeah, you can't apply for Medicaid if you don't need the services yet, but if you're close to needing the services, then it may make sense.
We had another trust question. Debbie, I'm going to move this over to you, if you don't mind. So the question is, can your trustee sell your house without you knowing about it?
That's a great question. It's funny, I get those questions all the time. And the answer is no. You reserve the privilege of living in your house and unfortunately paying all the bills, even when it's in a trust. So the first thing they're going to look at, let's just say the trustee decides they're going to sell your house. The attorney that's doing the real estate closing, which is also a good day in question, is going to look at the trust, and the first question is going to be, is the grantor still alive, right? And if the grantor is still alive, they're going to make sure that you actually want to sell your house, and they're going to, a lot of times they'll have you either sign off on the deed, or you'll have an acknowledgement that the trustee still has the ability to sell the house. So generally, no, they cannot sell the house without you knowing that. Especially if you're living in it, that'd make it really hard.
Sorry, Harry, we got another one. I'll move it over to you. If I have a long-term care insurance policy with a New York State partnership plan, how concerned are these changes to me, or is it not much to talk about right now?
Well, if it's truly a partnership policy, then you have purchased certain, minimum levels, and you will be able to go onto the Medicaid system and keep your assets. So generally, people who have that policy may not need a partnership policy. Some people couple the two. I have clients who've wanted to do it anyway. One of the things people are very concerned about is the premium increases in these policies. And while they have the policy, several years ago, we had 50-60% annual increases in 1 year. And so people look at coupling even a partnership policy potentially with a Medicaid asset protection trust in case the premium structure for the insurance company becomes unaffordable to them, or they just, they're paying maybe $8, $10, $12, $15,000 a year for some of these husband-wife policies. And it comes to a point where even people with large incomes find that they want to look at alternatives to paying that large premium every year. So generally speaking, in terms of qualifying for Medicaid, no, but from a financial standpoint, it's something we ought to look at.
Thanks, Harry. And since you started this whole webinar, why don't you end it?
Okay. Whoa, lights just went on. We have automatic lights in our conference rooms and our offices here in Albany. So, in the shadow of my screen, I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. Again, we appreciate your confidence and your faith in our law firm. I hope we keep meeting your expectations and fulfilling all your estate planning and elder law needs. Please feel free to call us anytime. We're looking forward to talking to you and actually meeting with you in our offices. Thanks for joining us.
Well, in the video, I think if I did it right, at least the recording, they could only see us attorneys. So everyone give a little wave. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye-bye.